This episode is addressed to a specific person. Not exclusively, anyone can listen, but it is written with one person in mind, the Indian brother. The man who grew up in the same house as a sister, who ate at the same table, who breathed the same air, who was, for the first 18 or 20 years of his life, closer to her than almost anyone else in the world would ever be, and who, despite of all that proximity, may have never once sat beside her and asked, "Are you okay? Not are you sick? Not did something happen, but in the quiet, genuine, unhurried sense, are you happy? Is this a life you wanted? Is there something you are carrying that nobody sees?" I want to talk today about that question. Why it wasn't asked, what it would have cost to ask it, what it cost her that it wasn't, and what becomes possible even now, even after all the years that have passed, when a brother begins to ask it. This is not an accusation. I want to be clear about that from the beginning. It is an invitation to look at something that was always in the room, in your own house, that you may not have been taught to see. The story Indian families tell you about brothers is a story of protection. He looks out for her, he walks with her, he is there if anyone bothers her. When she gets married, he is part of the ceremony that sends her into her new life. He is, in the cultural imagination, her guardian, her defender, the one who would do anything for her. And this is often true. The love is real. The protectiveness is genuine. In many Indian families, the bond between siblings is one of the most warmest and most durable relationships in a person's life. But protection is a very particular form of care, and it is worth examining what it includes and what it systematically leaves out. Protection is oriented outward. It is about external threats, the person who might harm her, the situation that might compromise her safety. It is reactive. It positions her as someone who needs to be defended from the world. What it is not oriented toward is her interior life, her desires, her private unhappiness, the quiet question she carries about whether her life is the one she would have chosen. Protection, as it is understood in the Indian family context, has almost nothing to say about any of that. And so, a brother can love his sister deeply, genuinely, and completely, and still have almost no idea who she actually is. What is actually happening in many Indian sibling relationships is a profound and largely invisible asymmetry. They grew up in the same house, but they do not grow up in the same house. She grew up in the house where her behavior was monitored, her choices were discussed, her future was planned by consensus, and the question of what she wanted was consistently secondary to the question of what was appropriate. She learned to edit herself, to move carefully, to want within sanctioned limits. He grew up in a house where his freedom was assumed. His choices were largely his own. His future was understood to be his to shape. His needs for space, for independence, for a life that was genuinely his were not considered requests, they were considered rights. This is not about blame. Both of them were inside the same family. Both were shaped by the same parents and the same cultural air. He did not steal her freedom. He was simply given more of it without being asked whether that was fair and without anyone requiring him to notice the difference. But here is what the difference produced over time. She became, in ways I have described in previous episodes, expert at carrying things differently, at managing her interior life in private, at performing fine when the honest answer was something more complicated. And he became, through no particular failing of his own, unequipped to ask. Not because he didn't care, but because nobody taught him that caring included asking. They taught him to protect her. They did not teach him to know her. And so he has spent years, perhaps decades, loving a version of his sister that she curated for the family, the version that was fine, that was managing, that had no needs he needed to worry about. And she has spent those same years being loved from careful distance, held, but not known. The Indian family assigns roles to its children along gender lines from the very beginning. And these roles are not just about what each child does, they are about what each child is trained to perceive. Boys are trained to perceive the external world as their domain, threats, opportunities, responsibilities that live outside the home. These are in his register. He is taught to be alert to them, to manage them, to be capable in relation to them. Girls are trained to perceive the relational world as their domain, the emotional temperature of the house, the needs of the people in it, the dynamics between family members, the maintenance of harmony. These are in her register. She is taught to be alert to them, exquisitely, exhaustingly alert. The result is two children growing up in the same house with almost entirely different fields of perception. She notices everything about everyone. She has been trained to. She knows when her mother is quietly unhappy. She knows when her father is worried about something he hasn't said. She knows the texture of every relationship in the house because her survival, in a social sense, has depended on reading the room accurately. He's been largely untrained in this kind of perception, not because he is less capable, because it was never required of him. The emotional labor of the household was not his assignment, and so he grew up with a genuine blind spot in the direction of other people's interior lives, including, most critically, his sisters. This is why the question was never asked, not because he didn't love her, because he was never trained to see that it needed to be asked. The skill of asking, of reading another person's interior life and noticing when it might need attention, was systematically not developed in him, while being systematically overdeveloped in her. The asymmetry in perception was built before either of them had language for it. By the time they are adults, when she is married, when he is married, when they are both navigating their own lives, the pattern has calcified into something that feels like simply how things are. She calls, she checks in, she manages the family relationships, including often his relationship with their parents, which she monitors and facilitates and smooths. She is the one who remembers birthdays, tracks illnesses, senses when something is wrong in the family system, and quietly moves to address it. He receives this not ungratefully, he appreciates it in the background way. You appreciate something that has always been there. But he does not reciprocate it in kind because he was not trained to. He does not call to ask how she is. He does not notice when something in her voice sounds different. He does not wonder when she says she's fine, whether fine is actually what she means. And she, for her part, rarely tells him when it isn't, because she learned a long time ago that the people in the family were available for certain kinds of conversations and not others, and that the conversation about her interior life, her private struggles, her honest state, was not the family structure had a container for. So they love each other across a gap that neither of them can quite see or name, a gap produced by years of different training, different permissions, different relationships to their own needs and other people's. And occasionally, in the middle of a family event, or at the end of a phone call, or in a moment when something brushes close enough to the surface that she almost says it, there is a pause, a place where the real conversation could begin. And it usually doesn't because neither of them quite know how. I want to address the brother directly here because what I am about to say is simple, and I think it is important enough to say simply. You do not need to become a different person to change this. You do not need therapy or a workshop or a dramatic renegotiation of your relationship with your sister. You need to ask one question genuinely without an agenda, without rushing towards the answer. How are you? Not how are the kids, not how is work, not is everything okay at home? Those are logistical questions and they will receive logistical answers. How are you? Meaning I'm asking about you specifically, your interior state, what you are carrying, what you are thinking about, what you are not saying to the other people in your life. And then this is the harder part. Receive whatever she says, without fixing it, without minimizing it, without redirecting it towards something more comfortable. Most brothers are not equipped for this conversation the first time they have it. It is unfamiliar. It may feel disproportionate. You asked a simple question and something larger came out. The larger thing is not a crisis. It is simply what has been there all along, waiting for a container. You are the container. Not because it is your responsibility to carry your feelings, it isn't. But because you are the person who grew up in the same house, who knows the context without an explanation, who is already, by virtue of the shared history, closer to the truth of her life than almost anyone else. And the cost of asking is genuinely nothing. A question, a few minutes of genuine attention, the willingness to hear an honest answer. What it gives her, the experience of being asked by you, of being seen by the person who has known her the longest, that is not nothing. That is, for many women, one of the most unexpectedly significant gifts they have ever received. I want to end this with something that is not addressed to the brother, it is addressed to her, to the sister who have been fined for so long that she has almost forgotten what it feels like to be asked. The fact that he never asked is not evidence that you are not worth asking about. It is evidence of what he was taught and what he was not taught, and the specific shape of a love that was real but incomplete, that held you without knowing you. You did not need a protector, or not only a protector, you needed someone who already knew the landscape of your life to simply turn towards you and ask about what was growing there. You were worth that. You have always been worth that. And there is something I believe is also true. Though I hold it carefully because it cannot be forced and it cannot be guaranteed, many brothers, when given the opening, will ask. Not because they suddenly became different people, but because they always had the capacity for it. It was simply never activated. The question was never asked, can still be asked. The conversation that was never had can still be had. The version of the relationship where you are genuinely known by each other, not performing, not managing, not editing, that version is still available. It requires one person to begin. It does not require perfection. It requires only the willingness to say, I am here. Not to protect you from something, just here. Tell me how you are. That is where it starts, and it is a place worth starting. The relationship between siblings, what it carries, what it costs, what it could be if the training that separated them was examined honestly and with care, is at the heart of my book. Dear sister, dear brother, Letters of Freedom. It is a book written for both of them. For the sister who has been carrying things in private for too long, and for the brother who loves her from a careful distance without fully understanding why or knowing how to close it. If this episode landed somewhere in you, in either direction, that book is where I continue the conversation. The details are in the show notes.